And yet more concerning news for our shrinking armed forces, as bosses have caught over 3,000 Army, Navy and RAF personnel using cocaine in the last 5 years, which would be big enough to make up 4 combat-ready battalions. Now, the wider numbers are even more concerning, with 4,160 facing the boot from the armed forces for drug use, with cannabis and ecstasy also regularly being found in drug tests. And I'm joined now by the former British Army officer and defence analyst, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Stuart, always a delight to have you on the show. Now, the headline writers are having fun. They're saying this is the marching powder, squad is on the sniff, but it's not a laughing matter. A lot of young people in this country are turning to drug use. Soldiers, armed forces people, it appears they're no different. What's going on?
Well, good afternoon, Martin. I think really you've hit the nail on the head there, that if we remember that the armed forces of all 3 services recruit from the civilian population, and drug use of that sort is rife in the civilian society, then it reflects itself in the armed forces. Now, that is not to condone it in any way, because I can think of no more lethal combination than a couple of snorts of cocaine and a high-powered rifle. But I dare say that if you were to drug test those who work at Canary Wharf and in the city, and indeed in some media organisations, the results might be much, much worse. So I think we've got to take it as being unfortunate, not the sort of thing that we want in the armed services, but it does reflect wider society from which the armed forces recruit.
Yeah, I mean, there was a slight wry, sideways smile from myself when journalists in the tabloids are getting a bit pious about extracurricular activities, shall we say, and I can see you share my smile there, Stuart Crawford.
Indeed,
but nevertheless,
indeed. I just wondered whether perhaps the BBC and ITN and maybe even GB News have a sort of mandatory drug test on a Monday morning. I think the results would be quite shocking.
I wouldn't know about that. But the fact of the matter is, as you said, we're not in command of rifles. We're not in command of tanks, of explosives, of things that can cause harm. So in that respect, we can brush this aside by saying, well, this is just a wider reflection of British society. But should people in the armed forces be held to a higher standard?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that's a fair point. I think they should, because of the nature of the job they do. But I dare say we have to be aware of the temptations. If you're stationed in Aldershot or Tidworth or Warminster or somewhere like that, and you get away at the weekend down to the local pubs and clubs, then it's going to be there. And the temptation to partake in it is all present. You know, it's omnipresent. The drug of choice of the armed forces over the years, of course, has been alcohol. And when I served in Germany in the 1980s, we consumed Herculean amounts of alcohol, both inside the barracks and when out on our tanks on exercise. So I'm not going to get too pious about it, but I do think that it's something that we would want to discourage very strongly.
Yeah, there's something that raises the eyebrows about being tanked up while in control of a tank. Even if it is just on an exercise, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, that's a bit of an eye raiser. What should be done? I mean, are we at the point where we are going to have zero tolerance? We do see that in some organisations. Is that a tad too heavy-handed, would you believe, for the armed forces?
I think it's. I mean, I wouldn't think it's a tad too heavy-handed. It's the question is how is it applied? And if there were, for example, everybody returning to camp after a weekend had to go through some sort of drug testing regime as they came back into barracks, I think that would do a little bit to alleviate what is a concerning matter. But the other thing is, of course, people will always discover some other way to enjoy themselves recreationally. And it really is a case of trying to get ahead of the game. I don't think it can be stopped, absolutely, but it can be discouraged very much so. And that's what's going on at the moment, I hope.
And Stuart, without again trying to in any way justify any of this behaviour, when we look at men and women who are in situations where it's life or death, where they are existing in a very, very heightened state of their own mortality, of danger, of preparedness. That's an incredibly stressful job, something that few of us on Civvy Street can ever hope to imagine. And so blowing off steam might have been a few pints back in your day. Is that a part of the makeup? Does it attract people who are drawn towards taking risks, towards danger? And that might mean there's some backdrop, some prevalence perhaps to be drawn towards this.
Well, I think that's definitely an element of it. Quite a lot of people, of course, join the armed forces to get a skill or a trade, which is a part and parcel of the whole military process. And I dare say the police and the fire service, for example, are more frequently presented with challenging situations than the armed forces tend to be. So I don't know what the comparison data is like. I don't know what the statistics are like. But I mean, I wouldn't make any excuses for it, except to say it does happen. And I think we've got to be really grown up and adult and realize it happens and try and mitigate both the results of it and also discourage the use of such substances.